Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this episode of SRE Practitioner Series. I'm your host, Suresh GP, and today we have Tony Holmes joining us, who is the SRE head at ditto.com. Thanks, Tony, for joining us today with our viewers and sharing your perspectives on your journey to become an SRE. How are you doing today?
Glad to be here. I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Tony, give us a bit of a background about how has been your journey becoming an SRE? Where did you start? And always people ask this question, what do you need to do to become an SRE? So, how has been your journey?
I got started in the professional video and broadcast space, working as a design engineer that built hardware and software. I wrote operating systems and firmware, so heavy customized, but what I would call vertically reliable infrastructure, military spec grade, military spec chips, boards, fabrication, and design techniques for gear that was meant to operate in extreme conditions. But when I was there at my first company and as an intern, it dawned on me that people were purchasing like our servers in multiples, and we would have failures when they would lose data. And it just dawned on me that I likened it to RAID. There's no reason why we could not make our systems reliable by doing a block storage Ceph-esh type of system and make the data a lot more reliable. So I built it.
Hmm.
And that really got me started. It was when I actually did my first .com, where I actually put horizontal reliability into practice. I did one of the in .com one day, so back in 96, 97. We built an unlimited storage hosting provider, and we needed the ability to upgrade and not lose data over time. And so that's where my interest grew. To get into it, you just got to be curious.
Hmm.
And that actually, I think we'll go into, like, I think the first question you're going to want to ask, which is,
Yeah. So
what
one
is
of
an
the
SRE?
yeah. So one of the things, as you rightly said, is the whole site reliability engineering as a concept from Google focuses on reliability and resilience. But as a practitioner, as you've gone through this whole journey of SRE, what does SRE mean for you, and how do you represent that so everybody understands what the heck is SRE?
So I I've seen every definition of SRE, and there's a running joke between my friends and I. If you ask six SREs what is the definition of SRE, you'll get seven definitions. But when I sit back and take a look at it, there are three hallmark traits of individuals,
Hmm.
and it's a mindset. It's
Hmm.
insatiable curiosity, extreme empathy combined with systems thinking.
Hmm.
Um, these are the traits that you'll get among your system administrators, database administrators, network admins, systems engineers, platform engineers, developers, DevOps, actual SREs, developers, program managers, TPMs, leadership. There is those attributes are not just relegated to SREs, but I've seen them across this entire swath of skill sets. So that's why I don't think it's a skill set. It is a mindset. Now, Google has gone and done a lot of good with their SRE handbook that they did. And they codify a lot of things. The one thing that I also call out is that book, even inside Google, is aspirational. A
Hmm.
lot of the stuff they've done is either not, they've either done it and moved on, or they decided it wasn't uh, good or pertinent or relevant for what they're doing and did something else, because of course the book has a lead time, and everything at Google keeps on moving. But Google is one of the biggest companies that put the most investment into their platform and the reliability practice.
Right.
They're also not perfect. I've seen their cycle. There's different leadership moves in and through. They're trying to change SREs to plain operators.
Hmm.
Maybe that'll work at some point, but I have consistently seen dev teams augmented with SREs have far better outcomes than dev teams operating independently without someone with an SRE perspective.
Correct. No, I think it's a very valid point that you talked about mindset, you talked about systems thinking. So let's dwell a little bit about this whole beast about systems thinking. We all know that everybody in the value chain is very good to what they do, 100%. but then they don't care about the left hand side of the spectrum or the right hand side of the spectrum. So
Yeah.
how do you see people have the ability to build that system thinking? You think as a developer, you look at a tester, you're looking at the operations person, from that part of empathy that you talked about, understanding the level playing field, putting yourself into their shoes and understanding that. But it's a little bit of a big ask from a system thinking perspective because of the complexity that we are dealing with. So
Yes.
if someone was venturing into an SRE, and when we know about mindset, empathy, and systems thinking, how do you handle that system thinking approach? What are some of those ways to navigate through?
That's typically part of the growth journey from a junior to a mid to a senior into your staff level. When we liken it back to the DevOps Ho Shi Ra. Now I'm forgetting the terms, but it's learn, do, teach are the three levels.
Right,
And well, once you get to the level of teach, and many systems, once you get to teach, you're already starting to think about, okay, what are the things that I depend upon? What are the things that depend upon me? Because you're the expert in your space, and it becomes part of your natural thing. Because especially during incidents, if someone upstream of you is now having an issue with your service, you're going to hear about it. You're going to deal with it.
right.
Um, but intentionally developing and stepping back and taking a look at where you fit into the ecosystem um, is one of those things that really differentiate you into becoming a staff, which is starting to look at the broader picture. Some juniors and mids have that bent. They always want to know how they fit in, how things are put together. But once they're able to get to the point where they become the subject matter expert and actually understand the architecture, who's dependent, and start engaging with other teams, their impact and their ability to impact will be, or to influence, will be limited. So it is part of a growth. I actually just interviewed a mid yesterday, and I am looking forward to really bringing him in and seeing, because he's demonstrating he's very much in that do, but he's starting to show that spark of how do I fit in, where do I fit in.
Mm,
So I don't liken it to, like, while I talk about this progression there, you will see the spark of it because people will have a natural curiosity, and that's what I mean by insatiable curiosity. What is going on? How do we fit in? How do we fix these problems? And like,
mm,
not fix them, but like permanently, so they're not an issue. Or how do we make sure that they don't come back to bite us?
yeah,
That's kind of a hallmark of a really good invested SRE.
awesome. So in terms of doing site reliability engineering, what are the biggest blockers? What are some of the biggest blockers to reliability aspects? I mean, it's everybody talks about reliability, but there is inherent constraints and blockers that prevents us to think and move towards reliability. So, what are some of the blockers that you've seen?
So the big one is culture,
Mm,
far and away. And that is usually tied to incentivization structures.
mm,
So if you take a look at a lot of companies' perf and growth, so for their annual reviews and for a promotion, they talk about what is your impact, what have you landed, but they don't tie it necessarily back to the SLOs and goals of the company.
mm,
How have you contributed to delivering reliability, to delivering meeting our SLOs and these sorts of things? So that creates a culture of me. I need to deliver to show. I need to. Now, there'll be some really good leaders that will try and bring that all together to allow people to shine, but I find that is few and far between. The second part of that, again, is there's a very deep personal overinvestment in solving a problem with a technology. I built this thing, as opposed to solving the problem, solving the outcome. As we grow and technology accelerates, and now we're shifting to an AI forward world, you should not be bind or constrained by the technology. If you're the inventor of a technology, of course, like, I can see you being like the developers of Python or ML models or transformers. Yeah, like there's going to be, your name's going to be associated for a lot of good reasons for a long time. But the fact that you said I built a search engine, don't be tied to the implementation, because it will change. Someone will come along at some point and implement something better, and that is the nature of technology. But when you combine those two, those two wheel big paradigms, you get into a very intractable, why should I care about reliability? And unless you have a leadership structure that cares about and makes it part of the performance metric of the company and ties your performance into those metrics, you're going to be facing an uphill battle.
Yeah.
You
And
could make it personal though, and say, reliability, we're going to help reduce incidents and keep you from being paged. That's a way. And that again, you're using that selfish tendency because of incentivization to help.
And it's valid. And for me, it's also about this whole concept of SLO doesn't work as until we have this whole performance indicators common across the value chain. Because as a developer, I am measured by my velocity or the features released on a sprint, whereas my
Yeah.
operations team is talking about response time and resolution time. So where on the earth do I have a common metric that I'm not only being tracking, but that's part of my performance indicator? That's the kind of the skin in the game, which is
Yeah.
kind of the problem in many of the organizations that we have seen, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of designing for reliability, right? Why can't we design a system that is inherently more reliable than what we have now? What's preventing us from building the super brilliant, reliable systems at the first place?
So initially, cost.
Hmm.
Reliability costs money.
Hmm.
And you should really be designing for the level of reliability that you're willing to pay for.
Right.
Each additional 9 is at least an order of magnitude more expensive.
Right.
That's just a loose ballpark. It just makes sense because you're making it 10 times. And actually, it scales more. It's easily more than like maybe it's two orders of magnitude, but it's significant.
Right.
Um, and you don't necessarily need to be reliable. It depends on the experience you're trying to deliver to your user and how important it is. Like my Gmail, if it's not available for a few minutes a day, that's something I'm probably be annoyed with, but I'm not going to be overly upset about. But if I can't get to my financial data, my
Right.
bank accounts to pay a bill, so anchoring on what is important, and this is actually where SLOs anchored onto user journeys, not services.
Sure.
What is the user doing that crosses your services, whatever that flow looks like, to make it in that's what's important to the end user. What does that journey look like? And that's why we should be looking at that. You can try, if you're smart, you will design your system like that from the beginning, but you don't often know what that is.
Correct.
So, and the second part is, well, you may have an unreliable system. So like, oh, we're just going to build a new reliable system.
Mm.
One, you're doubling efforts. That is not worthwhile. Second, you probably have not exhausted all the learning opportunities on where the breakage and friction points are in your existing environment.
Mm.
So working on an iterative approach and addressing the bottlenecks one by one where you reasonably can is a much better approach. Evolve. Google was not built in a day. They didn't
Correct.
just suddenly be up and get 6 nines. They took time. Same thing with AWS. They were out for a decade before S3 had their 12 nines of durability. So doing stepwise is not smart because you're
Right.
also introducing fundamental changes that you have to relearn. So evolutionary iteration is always the best approach. If you are lucky that you actually start a company with a team of SREs, then that's probably the one time where you can design it from scratch with SLOs as a first class citizen.
Right. And absolutely. And you said right that it's an evolutionary process. It's not built in a day. And it's about iterative improvements, but also trying to understand where you need to spend your time and energy. It's not for everything. So scoping becomes extremely important.
Yes.
And then we start addressing this whole need. So that brings to the question of a lot of companies I talk about get very enamored with the concept of microservices or Kubernetes, right? So the question
Yes.
is, should we use microservices or Kubernetes for improving new product reliability? Um, will that fit in all environments? Or are we kind of, asking people to do things just for the sake of doing it? Or is this just a hype that people think that it will solve the reliability problem?
So you have to look at the creators of both microservices and Kubernetes. It was Google in both cases.
Hmm.
A Google microservice is larger. So I ran a couple of them when I worked at YouTube. If I just take the search stack, it is larger than most companies' entire stack, period. Two and
Hmm.
a half million cores. That's that, and that's micro.
Hmm.
Um, Microservices add complexity because they decentralize and distribute queries across multiple devices and boxes, where if you had a well-structured monolith, you'd actually it's a lot easier to manage. And in fact, there are companies that have done the full journey to microservices and come back to a well-structured monolith.
Mm,
There is a place for service-oriented architecture where you have big, massive blocks of services that are like have very distinct boundaries.
right.
That makes a lot of sense. So you have a group of monoliths and Kates. Everyone thinks that they need to jump on the Kates. Kates, again, is massively over-engineered for the kind of things and the kind of control structures that Google faced, and then they took it in and tried to do it in the common world. The vast majority of companies are going to be perfectly fine using some of the older structures using VMs. Like not tying yourself to physical hardware where possible is a really good idea,
Right.
having that flexibility. But VMs will often solve the problem, or using the old, containers actually were built way back in the late 80s, late 80s, early 90s by Sun, the Sun jails.
Right.
FreeBSD had them as jails again. And they really picked up in the early 2000s under Linux and accelerated with Docker and all the other technologies that followed. They have their place. They all have trade-offs. And people say we have to do Kates, but managing Kates it's a gnarly beast. It does everything and anything and more than you ever wanted.
Mm,
And I have spent my last 6 years deep in the guts of the Kate stack, solving some of the gnarliest problems that we faced. And like Apple, a very large vendor, when I went in there, had a real problem with in their Kate's environment with 10% of their connections being refused at any moment in time, but they would just reconnect and go. But that would impact the users. Um, I had to dig deep with some amazing teams there that were really, really deep into the low-level architecture because of where I owned the service. I owned the teams that ran iCloud Edge, that ran FaceTime and iMessage. So this was not something I could monkey around with. I needed these services to be reliable. And Kate's was a constant thorn in our side because of operational concerns. We got down there, brand new team standing stuff up. No, start on ECS. ECS is a good one if you want to start. Once you get to a certain size, you should be considering data centers. There are VM-based solutions like the old OpenStack. It's still around. You can send like the first real scalable infrastructure we built was built on Puppet and Foreman and ESXi containers
right.
or VMs. So there are many ways to slice this that don't incur the massive overhead of either a microservice or a K8s. A microservice built on K8s, your observability problem just explodes exponentially.
Now, that's a very valid point that you talked about, and it's just not going and clinging on to a shiny new technology because it looks to be cool, because you really need to understand your level playing field. So that is the adapt and adopt aspect
Yeah.
that comes in very important for us to digest what is needed. And it's also interesting
Yes.
that the SRE engineers should start asking, why should we do this, right? And this is going back
Yeah.
to your curiosity question. Why should we do it? What happens? What are the different alternatives? Because there's also a cost economics that is coming into picture, whether it's FinOps that you
Absolutely.
talk about, Cloud
Yeah.
Ops that you're talking about. It's a very important aspect to understand. Is it worth spending that level of capex? And then what's the return on investment? So I think they
Yeah.
also need to have become more business savvy to understand
Yes.
how that needs to be applied and make it work. So,
Yeah.
why does efficiency sometimes support and sometimes impinge on reliability? Because one of the parameters from a metric standpoint is about operational efficiency. But there's
Yes.
got a kind of double-edged sword. It could go for or against the whole aspect of reliability. So, how do you see that?
Yeah. So it's a sliding scale. There's a tension there. Things can be so inefficient you're wasting resources, and you absolutely want to find better ways to utilize better. Again, at YouTube, their stack and they have custom hardware, and the search stack at the bottom lies these really powerful custom machines that hold the search data, the shards and the indexes, and do all the lookups. And they were never ever loaded by any stretch. And yet we had these really, really long tail latencies that would extend 1, 2 minutes plus, like just absolutely crazy. And we were starting to see when we're doing analytics that we had some countries that lived entirely having these really, really poor experiences as a result, because they used YouTube search as their primary search engine. And it was one of my engineers that actually realized we had configured them incorrectly because we inherited the Google search app. There's modifications made, really, really good, powerful stuff. And then we deployed it, but we didn't spend the time to tweak things. So there's the concerted effort by when I joined to take a look at this one problem because my engineer was complaining about it. Cool, let's go investigate it. And he found that we were under provisioning the workers that actually served the data. And what we found was we were going from 2 minute long tail to 20 millisecond. Like it
Mm.
was a dramatic improvement. And we saw that this one country, its experience came in line with everyone else. And it was a very good experience. So that is where efficiency helps because it also relieves pressure because that base configuration bottleneck was constraining the entire system.
Mm.
And that actually gave additional capacity, literally additional capacity to the entire system to the point where during I don't know if March of 2020 rings a bell, but during the month of March 2020 when COVID onset and everyone
Right.
went locked down, Google and YouTube, we saw a 35% increase in traffic, which is typically a year's worth of traffic, but we saw that in a month. But because of this work we had done, we decreased our footprint by 25%, and
Mm.
we were still operating within massive margins. So that helped our reliability because suddenly we had this extra cost savings that we could do.
Mm.
Now, I've gone to other places like you have to go and obtain X percentage of utilization, and say must be CPU must be 80%.
Right.
Unless you're doing high compute math or a lot of like some of the CPU bound models and mathematical tools, they use a lot of CPU. But you know what I've seen almost in every single company I've been at, the average utilization is 6 to 7% across all workloads, and it's like plus or minus a 0.5% for every company I've been at, which is like I think I'm on my 14th at this point. It's very consistent. So if people start making statements like that actually, and they actually penalize you for not obtaining it without understanding, as you drive it up, you may actually be running your systems too hot in some cases, and you're actually running it too close to acceptable reliability limits. And if you have a failure, you start having a cascading failure because you're driving things too hot, too fierce, and there's not enough capacity. Now, at, at YouTube, we were able to get for search 85% average utilization. Why? Because it has a massive traffic surface. Like that is reasonable. But most other places, they have mostly like anything that's US based will have a diurnal pattern, which means in the middle of the night, nothing's getting utilized. So 50% will be good. And if you can maybe use your hardware to do batch jobs on it, some nightly processing, cool, you can bring that up. But you have to start looking at what you're trading off for in all your aspects, memory utilization, CPU, network bandwidth, and stuff like that. Reliability costs money. You need a certain level of redundancy to ensure that if failures happen, you can accommodate and adapt to it. But if you cut into that too much for the sake of efficiency, you just have to ask the question, is the reliability trade-off worthwhile? So that's how both ends can work for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's well sought after aspect because we need to look at what's the impact of doing something. You always talk about the pros, but there is an inherent part of what do we lose by doing some of those things and trying to get a balance. And it's brainstorming within the team, which is more appropriate at that particular juncture that makes the most sense for an organizations to drive
Yeah.
towards the reliability journey. Now,
Mhm.
the biggest question for all of us today is about AI and agentic AI, right? And generative agentic AI. So for SREs, how do you see those whole trends shifting gears? Are we going to jump into the bandwagon, or is it too much of an hype? Or where do you think organizations are looking at the power of AI?
So I was for the longest time an AI skeptic. At early in my career, I actually was doing AIs on ATI
Mm,
systems,
mm,
ATI accelerators back in the day, 2004 timeframe. So that tells you how old I am. I'm doing neural network, and I was training models for various reasons, and that ended up being a dead end because after blowing up my rig, so that put a stop to that. But seeing how we went to LLMs, I I knew some of the inherent limitations of LLMs. It's probabilistic. People say, "Oh, it reasons." No, it's not. Reasoning, in the sense is it's pattern matching against a massive set of data that it's trained against, and finding the most likely scenario that applies, and what are the appropriate things that came out of that. So
mm,
people say, "Oh, it takes a look at this and assesses it, and it finds the right pattern." And no, it's not reasoning. It's just pattern matching.
mm,
So that is actually very powerful in the right cases. The one thing that AI has been horrible at is math and time.
mm,
And I'm going to refer to again this one really incredible engineer I was fortunate to work with at YouTube.
mm,
And YouTube has a lot of data, and it's very well structured.
mm.
And so he was trying to do an AI SRE that we're looking at based on signals and inputs and dependencies.
Right.
What would you find out? And he would get wacko correlations. And fictitiously, is like we have a service degradation in North America caused by a hard drive failing in Europe because
Mm,
their timestamps were very like within like one digit of each other.
mm,
Servers are inherently not accurate. The acceptable TTL is 2 seconds, plus or minus 1 second, and
mm,
that is an infinite amount of time for AI. So that model sucks. It's
mm,
horrible.
mm,
Now, when I was at our firm, I got introduced to Resolve that has the evidence-based model. That is a powerful model.
mm,
They are not banking on the AI to know what is right. And there's a
mm,
bunch of companies that are actually coming up with this exact model. And I think this is the way that it goes. It presents to the operations team or the SREs or devs that are on call, this signal fire based on your runbooks that we've trained against. These are the most likely signals and paths you should investigate.
mm,
And they provide a mechanism for you as the SRE or the agent to say, yeah, we investigated that path, and give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, strengthen it or weaken it.
mm,
And over time, it reorganizes it. And I would call that model the living runbook model,
mm,
where based on your infrastructure over time, and as you mature and your workload shifts, the probabilities and the priority shift as no, it's actually more commonly this service which has picked up in prominence. Oh, no, in future it's actually this thing because we've migrated to a new system or what have you. That's incredibly powerful.
mm,
It has constantly brought the right attention when dialed in to the engineer that makes the decisions. Now, I don't know what's going to happen and what is going to be the big unlock for AI. I do
mm,
not think LLMs are the way. Multimodal models with very specific, so the network of experts model with some very specific implementations where you can actually get some reasoning, I think will eventually replace um, your responder AI, your responder model, and lessen the need to be on call, but
mm.
not eliminate it.
Right.
Because there will be some things that well, until we build robots that can do this and have a fully robotized data center that everyone uses.
Right.
Um, if you have a switch link with a bad uplink port, there's nothing you can do to fix that. And you're going to want to put a hysteresis in where you actually get a human to take a look, assess it, and make a decision. And it maybe you can program that in as well. It will take time. The thing that I have a mentor, and he asked me about 5 years ago, is where do you see the industry in 10 years? Because
Mm,
we're talking about AI, and I'm pretty much exactly where we are.
mm,
And is why? It says the AI is very much a tech sector bubble, predominantly in the silicon centers across the states. Many of the large Fortune 500 and many of the mid-cap companies and most of the small ones are operating manually, manual configuration. AI is like, maybe run an agent for their a receptionist, AI receptionist, or there is a massive market that is not going to shift until it is so mature that you're just buying a box that you're plugging in and it just goes.
Right.
That's going to be a long way off. Like, it needs to be toaster complexity
Awesome.
for people to pick it up. So it has a place. It has a very good place. It's going to be a long while before it tips into being what everyone does, because it is easy enough for everyone to use.
Yeah, very well articulated, Tony, with use cases and scenarios to look at. Don't blindly rely on AI. Sometimes they do a lousy job. So human beings
Yep.
should be on top of that and control and orchestrate this whole direction. So my final question, Tony, is over the years as being an SRE, I mean, working with, YouTube and some of those bigger conversations, implementations, including with Ditto. What are some of the lessons that you've learned that makes it much more valuable for our viewers to know in the world of SRE?
Do not blindly cut and paste reliability practices from one company to another. I worked at Google, at YouTube. I worked at
Right,
Netflix. I worked at Apple. Those
right,
three companies cannot be any further more different from each other, and they are like in the FANG group.
right.
Amazon is also very different. Meta, again, you're talking the largest companies, and they have very different reliability cultures there.
Hmm,
And I've seen people try to take one and copy paste it into another without understanding the culture first. I take a slightly different approach.
hmm,
I've seen what works, and I will take a look at the situation and have some conversations first and say, well, you know what? Maybe this will work. Oh, we tried this in the past, and here's why I failed. Oh, that's interesting. What else? And I ask questions. Um, there is value in having history and experience, but always be curious. Never come and say, oh, you guys should be doing X.
hmm,
That's not necessarily.
hmm,
What I usually will approach it on, or how I will usually approach a situation like that is, hey, I've seen this, I've had this experience in the past and it seems similar. Have you considered trying? Or what can you tell me about why this occurs so that maybe I can help out and dig in? Become a partner with engineers, especially the ones that are developing and on call. The ones that are on call and trying to work their way out of a problem, going in and finding empathy for them. That's why the extreme empathy. They are they have um, pressures on them that you may or may not understand. Some are spoken, some are not. And you want to understand what they're feeling in the moment as they're trying to respond to whatever the issue is. Something's not scaling properly. There's a performance issue. There's an actual outage. Um, and then work with them and have conversations and like address the problem. Okay, we had an incident, or I see you're addressing it. What have you guys worked through? I'd love to get into it with you. I've worked on performance before, and I might have some, like,
right.
always give that avenue that you may not, but you would like to try and give a hand. And if they can give you docs so that you can offload them, even better. But people that come in and dictate, this is how we're going to do things. It doesn't work. I always would come in, and I tend to be a quiet person, but you'll just see me popping up incidents, always present there, listening, making recommendations or suggestions or asking questions in the incident reviews and stuff like that, being that calm, present voice. Like, the whole point that I'm trying to emphasize there is this is a socio-technical system, a system that involves people. The people need to be cared for and the systems need to be blamed,
Hmm.
not the other way around, because a lot of people will try and care for their systems and blame the people. So with a little bit of empathy and a lot of curiosity, you should be walking in to an environment and getting a lay of the land and finding out the things that are probably the most painful and addressing those first.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you gain credibility, then they're more willing to trust some of these jumps that you may have to make, but always meet them where they are and walk them towards the final destination that where you would like reliability to be. And it will not always be ideal. I'm making constant trade-offs even now on where are my engineers at. They have pressures, they have features and things they have to deliver against the reliability things that we're facing. So what makes sense to bring them 2 steps closer? It doesn't need to be a mile. 2 steps will get us a big reduction in incidents or a reduction in them trying to isolate a problem, like these sorts of things. So that's I think the biggest lesson that I've learned in these 32 years that I've been doing this at this point.
Awesome, Tony. It's been a great pleasure listening to you from real world experience of what an SRE goes through, some of those lessons learned, and some of those nuances of what people think SRE is from a reliability perspective and what's actually needed to be tailored to a company because not every company is Google. And that insight's actually been very valuable to validate that. You are very unique. Each one of the companies are unique. We cannot just do copy and paste. So what has worked in the other organization might not really work in this organizations and beyond. But just having that level of curiosity and empathy to look at, and probably we are not the smartest people. We might need to observe what's happening around before we decide the intent of how we can move in that particular direction. But there is a lot to do with cultural change and mindsets that you talked about, and getting that aspect of thinking that we will improve incrementally, and it's an evolutionary process. It's not a big bang approach. It's not just built in a day, but having that focus, single-minded focus of improving reliability and trying to fine-tune this with the understanding of trade-offs that is possible will go a long way in making this more valuable, being an SRE. So you still remember, you still believe that there is a future for SREs, isn't it?
For a very long time. And even I always consider it a win if we land SRE minded people in the builder's position, in
Mm,
product, in the developer engineering. If I do expect that operations and response and support will become more automated over time,
right.
but they still need to build it. And until we get our fundamental tools and Claude and all these other systems to actually start with fundamentals, security at rest, in flight, reliability practices applied and baked in, we're going to be needed for quite a while.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and but I always think there will be something somewhere, and then you'll eventually be a builder, and they're handling it for you, and you'll even still want to know how it works. Like
Yeah.
there's many devices you buy nowadays, you probably still want to crack apart and take a look inside. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony, for your time today. I know that our viewers would have enjoyed this insightful conversation, a lot of takeaways and nuggets of wisdom. And we hope to see you all in our next episode of SRE Practitioners. So please make sure that you subscribe to our channel and follow us. And we will be here for our next episode soon. Until then, celebrate the big work of what you do as an SRE and blaze. Thank you so much, Tony.
thank you for having me.